Iratus, Lord of the Undead, is at first glance akin to Darkest Dungeon, but then you start the game and realize that if it were Darkest Dungeon, you'd be playing as the dungeon and your voice is that of Caleb's from the Blood games. The game starts off with something that warms the very cockles of my heart. A disclaimer saying that the game is a hardcore tactical roguelike and basically to not take it lightly. The only other game that has done this that I've played is Age of Decadence, and I ended up really loving that game. Check out my review up here in the corner. But that's a tangent, let's get started with this review. If this is the first time on my channel, welcome. I am Steven Nonsense, geek culture analyst, kinda extraordinaire. If you're already a subscriber, welcome back and don't forget to click that bell button. You play as Iratus, a necromancer who tried his skeletal hand at the whole world domination shtick in the past, got defeated and entombed. However, being a necromancer has its perks, so when his sarcophagus is opened a millennium later, he springs back to unlife, and that's when you come into the picture. Your overall goal is to get some revenge on the mortals who defeated Iratus and most likely give that world domination thing another go. But you'll have to start from scratch and deal with the game's roguelike characteristics. Iratus packs in a bunch of various mechanics to make for a pretty interesting and non-boring experience. You have resource management and conversion, sort of base building, talent trees, turn-based tactical combat of course, and you have to balance everything with having little to no idea of what the encounters will be like, as well as the permadeath of your minions. The art style is cool and rather colorful, considering the overall theme of the proceedings. The animation is pretty nice as well, but it's a bit more liquidy than I would have liked. And I said liquidy, not fluid. But on the other hand, it also gives the game a slightly otherworldly sort of feel to it, so maybe it's just a subjective thing. It's not bad, it's just a bit weird. The art team wore their inspiration for the creature designs on their sleeves, with some minions like the Bride and Death Knight reminiscent of Blizzard characters, the Wraith having some serious Dementor vibes, the Banshee, Lich and Mummy looking like something from Heroes 5, not to mention the dwarves look a lot like Gimli. But even though I have made these associations, it's not like these characters are carbon copies. Oh, no. It looks like those characters were starting points or influences, and the art team did their own thing, which is consistently awesome, I have to say, and especially creative when it comes to at least some of the designs. Looking at you, Headhunter and Lost Soul. But let's talk about the mechanics, since that's what actually matters in this sort of a game. And allow me to start with the thing that surprised me the most, the sort of base building aspect. I wasn't surprised by it existing, it makes sense, but the thing I enjoyed most about it is how much it reminded me of the Necropolis castle screen of the Heroes games. And anything that reminds me of Heroes games is generally a good thing. Here, it's the graveyard where you were buried, which you now use as your base of operation. There are a bunch of buildings that you have to rebuild, but interestingly enough, the game does things a bit differently than you'd expect. There is only one specific type of resource that you can use to rebuild these, so that generally puts a limit on how much you can do at any one time. But also, in order to rebuild and then further upgrade each building, you are required to sacrifice a type of minion. Not any minion though, each building and upgrade will require different minions to be sacrificed. Not only that, but in order for them to function, the buildings will have to be populated with minions as well. So the overall cost of getting these things up and running is quite high, because despite you being this boss ass necromancer dude, there are limits to the number of minions that you can create. The buildings range in use from producing various types of resources, to being the only source of healing, to increasing some of your minions' experience even if they are not used to fight. So why can't you simply raise innumerable quantities of skeletons and zombies and whatnot? Well, because you need various parts to assemble your minions from. Each minion will require 4 parts, and these differ from creature to creature. In total, there are 10 individual parts that you can use to create undead minions, but also, as Iratus, you have at your disposal much more magical capabilities than simply raising the dead. You can also convert one type of resource into another, you can upgrade their quality, use them to create items that your minions can wear, or simply turn them into mana. Deciding on what is the best use of your resources is one of the main things you'll be doing between fights. because you have to decide between making low-level minions to improve the graveyard, upgrading the components so that you can improve your minions' base stats going further, or making a few items for some of your minions so that they function better. Upgrading components is pretty important though, because the game has rarity mechanics, so the rarer a component is, the more buffs it comes with. On the other hand, outfitting your minions with some items really improves their roles in the party, but if they die, you lose the items. There's a lot of risk-reward calculations that have to be made, but one thing is certain, your minions will die. Whether it will be down to them being critted by enemies or simply you not using them optimally, you will lose minions. The game says as much, but what it doesn't say is that you can get defeated so badly that at a certain point, you will be out of both resources and minions and will simply have to restart the game from scratch because there is no way of bouncing back. Such is the way of roguelikes, I guess. But all is not lost when you restart the game, because what does get carried over is any new minion blueprints that you have unlocked and your codex of knowledge of your enemies. That second part doesn't really do much, but the first part is very important. You start with 6 types of minions that you can create, but there are 16 in total. So there are 10 more minion blueprints that you will have to unlock by playing and achieving various things in your games. Some of the achievements require you to collect a certain number of bones, which is random, or deal an insane number of damage to your minions. There are several abilities and spells that do that. But this progress saves over to your next game if you have to start a new one. As Iratus, you can create undead abominations, which is great. You can modify the substance of your building materials, which is also pretty cool, but you have to be a very powerful spellcaster in order to do either of those things to begin with. So Iratus also has 4 spell-related talent trees. These either unlock spells which you can use in combat, increase the chances of various resources dropping, buff particular minions, or offer some form of passive bonuses when certain conditions are met. The interesting thing is that you can't really tell which things you will need from the beginning, because you'll need to play the game for a certain amount of time to get an understanding of the types of things you'll need for your particular playstyle, or simply to survive. I'll dive into this subject maybe more deeply in a future video if any of you are interested, let me know in the comments. Also, as Iratus, you can wear a very limited number of artifacts, which only further increased the hero's vibes as far as I'm concerned. So let's get to the main attraction though, combat. Fights are turn-based, usually between 4 of your minions and 4 enemies. Each of your minions has 6 abilities, but they don't have access to all of them all of the time. These abilities are place dependent, meaning that depending on the placing of a particular minion, they will have access to some of their abilities. The same minion will be able to do different things if they're first or second, as opposed to being third or fourth, for instance. And this is crucially important to your success, seeing as how there is no direct way of changing your minion's place while in combat, besides the use of their own abilities or a spell which you can unlock in the talent trees. You can set up how they start fighting, but they will shift positions all throughout an encounter, and this can and will prove to be a great source of frustration, but also a source of deep tactics, because your minion's abilities can also shift the positioning of your enemies, and there are several other abilities which exploit this. And this takes me neatly into the various combos or synergies that exist between some of your minions. Obviously, it's still very early days with this, and I haven't had all the time in the world to find them all. But at least as it stands now, I want to illustrate just one of these, the Bride Wraith combo. The Bride of Iratus has a stance ability in which she will attack any enemy that moves till her next turn. The Wraith has an ultimate type ability. All minions have one of these. These are super powerful abilities which use a special resource called Wrath, which is kinda the complementary resource to mana, both of which belong to Iratus. There are several artifacts and abilities in the game that influence the amount of Wrath or do something based on a particular amount of Wrath, just to add more complexity onto the pile. So back to the Wraith. Its ultimate ability deals a bunch of stress damage to all enemies, but also, more importantly for our purposes, it makes them all change their positions, which means that now the Bride stance will trigger and deal physical damage to all of them. So basically, you will be producing 2 sources of damage to all enemies for the Wrath cost of just 1. Keep in mind, this is the very start of the early access period, so who knows if this combo will survive until the full release, but I wanted to describe it here so that you have a general idea of the types of things that can be done in the game. It really reminded me a lot of Magic the Gathering combos, to be honest. You might have noticed I mentioned stress damage and physical damage. Indeed, there are in fact 3 types of damage that can be done in the game, and 2 different things that they will influence. These are physical, stress, and magic damage, and they will affect the HP bar or the sanity bar of an enemy. Physical and stress damage can be protected against to some extent, while magic damage cannot. So what's this stress damage and sanity bar? Well, it's all down to the advantages of not having a pulse anymore. Any living creature on the battle screen, none of yours mind you, can get pants-poopingly scared by your undead abominations. In fact, several of the minions focus heavily on causing your enemies to poop their pants. Once they reach certain levels of low sanity, enemies will be more likely to flee the battle or simply basically have a heart attack and die outright, regardless of how high their HP is. Did you get that right? Allow me to repeat. You can kill enemies by never physically damaging them. It's usually a good idea to have a blend of these sorts of damage dealers in your party though, seeing as how there are also enemies that will not have any sanity bars at all, and they can only be destroyed by taking their HP to 0. On the other hand, there are also enemies that are very heavily armored and very resistant to physical damage, and those are the ones that you're better off focusing stress attacks on. There will be some other things to mention about combat mechanics, but these are the general foundations that describe best what goes on in an average fight. I guess you can tell by the length and detail of this video that I am really enjoying Iratus. Maybe it's because of the theme, maybe because I have never played Darkest Dungeon, maybe because it makes me think that I am playing a different style of Heroes game, which would totally work by the way. I mean, I mentioned about how cool it would be to make a Skyrim style Heroes FPS again in my video about remaking RPGs, but something like this would be equally as cool. I have also barely mentioned anything negative about the game, and it's not like it doesn't have issues, especially in terms of balancing and the lack of ability to properly scout an encounter. Even Heroes at least give you an idea of the number of enemies. Iratus only shows you an image of one of the enemies in the party that you will be meeting. It's not that useful. So you might and will find yourself woefully unprepared for some encounters. Maybe because you aren't running a very mixed party and the enemy is perfectly able to counter you or simply cannot be damaged by your choice of means. Similarly, there are issues with some enemies being able to basically one-shot creature minions in certain conditions that can be very easily created. There's no real retreat button that allows you to leave an encounter and still save at least some of your minions so that you can regroup and form a better team for that particular encounter. Granted, some of these things work within the overall roguelike concept, which is fine, but at the moment they are also not properly balanced, so that can cause some frustration, at least in the beginning, until you get to learn how the game operates and you can play it better. I needed to run the tutorial and 2 games before starting to better understand how to play the game, like which things make sense to invest in at the beginning in terms of building the graveyard and talents and whatnot. And I am also very much aware that this just entered early access, and this is what early access is meant to be for, to allow developers to properly balance and further develop their games by using the input of those who play them. Don't forget that Darkest Dungeon came out of early access as a completely different game than it went in. Add to this the fact that the dev team has said it is on a 2-week cycle of balance patches and that they have a highly active Discord channel. Iratus, Lord of the Undead is a highly playable and super enjoyable early access title that has a lot of potential of becoming the next big turn-based tactics roguelike in the footsteps of Darkest Dungeon and Slay the Spire. So in case it still isn't clear, Iratus gets my nonsense seal of approval. If this is the type of game for you, get in on the Undead action and influence its development and further polish with your feedback. Also, if you're interested in seeing the game in more detail, let me know in the comments which part or parts of the game you're more interested in getting a closer look at, and I'll make it happen. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Steven Nonsense, and see you next time.